This poem is called For Innocent III. Hark Lothario, vicar of Christ, successor of Peter, the unbroken line, universal above the patriarchs 5, by Constantine was the donation marked. Against young Frederick, world marvel did you quarrel, to Dictatus Pape Hildebrand's undoubted numinous pride. Grand blossom of the papacy, in marble residing, with lawgivers 23. Yet with misery you regarded the flesh and limbs of body, cadaverous, hideous, fallen. With church dogmatics burnt, laurel wreathed round your mind, to the flame stake sent you, pontifex, sects of heresy, or otherwise denied them, sacrament by interdict, in desire to bring souls eternal torment. The pious just Cathar cried, is this not how Christ had died? Or ex cathedra are you Christ, millenarian, crusading heathen, slaying Arians? Do you risk that ultimate prize at price of playing Antichrist? And, pardon me. There's a lot of historical reference in this poem, so I thought I would go over it a bit. So, this poem is for Innocent III. I chose him because we did a class exercise in which we listed kind of people we liked, disliked, and felt were interesting. And I thought he was interesting. He could also go in the dislike category, but I also kind of respect some of his achievements. He was the most powerful pope, and he really, like about 100 years before him, the papacy really made a move to gain power over the secular rulers. And Innocent III probably achieved that more than any other pope. So, yeah, he's kind of an interesting figure. A lot happened because of him. So, in the first stanza, I call him Lothario, which is his given name. Innocent III is his papal name. And I say vicar of Christ, successor of Peter, unbroken line. These are just things the Pope has called themselves at various times. There's the successor of Peter, the Apostle Peter, and they're the vicar of Christ, which is to say they're like the one who speaks for Jesus on earth, something like that. And they're an apostolic succession is the term they used, which is to say an unbroken line from Peter. There's a whole chain of dudes going up, presumably to the present day, if you believe that. And he's above the patriarchs 5, or at least so he claimed. There were 5 main churches in the Roman Empire, 5 main Christian churches, and these were called like the patriarchates, the pentarchy, and they all had their own bishop, but at times the one in Rome would claim to be above all the others and hold that ultimate authority, and that always resulted in dispute by the other bishops. But especially in the time of the Gregorian Reform, which is that event I mentioned like 100 years before Innocent, that really centralized the papacy's power. That was when they were most insisting they were above the other patriarchs. But the other bishops denied this. They were like, well, no. By Constantine was the donation marked. This is in reference to the donation of Constantine, which was a forged document that said the Emperor Constantine in like the 300s, the Roman Emperor Constantine donated like kind of authority to the Pope at the time. So this forgery, this didn't actually happen, but it was claimed to happen. And popes would reference it and say, hey, look, actually we have authority over the land. not the emperors. You can see that the emperor actually gave us that authority. So they would reference this document, which was totally fake. Against young Frederick did you quarrel? This is Frederick the Great. Or maybe, I don't know if he had that appellation of the Great, but he did have the appellation of World Marvel. He was a Holy Roman Emperor. This is Frederick II, and he was kind of tutored by Innocent III. And they didn't quarrel that much, but maybe I think they mostly got along, but there were disputes. Anyways, to Dictatus Pape Hildebrand's numinous pride. Pardon me. So Hildebrand was really the first. He was a monk, then he became pope. Again, this is the guy's given name was Hildebrand, and then his papal name was Gregory VII, and so he's more known by the papal name. But he became pope. He was also advocating for papal supremacy, and he wrote a document called Dictatus Papae, which means in Latin dictates of the Pope, in which he was kind of claiming all this authority. It was kind of a very large move for him to do, so that's why I call him Dictatus Pape. And his pride is numinous because he's dead, presumably in heaven. If you are a believer in all this sort of I don't know, all this papal mythology. They kind of have their own sort of myths going on. So if one was a Catholic and they were into all this stuff, then he would be in heaven. But I'm kind of referencing all this, I think of it as papal mythology. I'm kind of referencing all this papal mythology in a sarcastic tone, but I do find it interesting. And he's proud because Innocent III is asserting authority over young Frederick. That's kind of what I was trying to say. Grand Blossom of the Papacy. Innocent III is the Grand Blossom of the Papacy because he's the most powerful one. This is the height of papal power. He's residing in Marble with Lawgivers 23. Now, this part is kind of interesting. Turns out, in the U.S., and I think it's it's some government thing, the House, Chamber of the House. I think it's that. In the Chamber of the House, there are 23 marble reliefs of great lawgivers, is what they're called. So, there's some people would know. There's, for example, they go way back. They kind of go over all of history. I'm kind of intrigued by it. There's like Moses. There's Solon, which is like a lawgiver, kind of a semi-mythical figure in Greece. Lycurgus, a semi-mythical lawgiver dude in Sparta. There's the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian. There's some other Rome dudes. There's Thomas Jefferson. There are a couple other English figures. Anyways, one of these figures is Innocent III, and because Innocent III did sort of preserve some Roman law, which at that time was kind of lost because Europe was kind of, I guess, authority was all scrambled all over Europe, and there was great difficulty in re-centralizing authority, and it probably never really succeeded. But the Papal Revolution was kind of trying to do that, and so they also reworked some Roman law and were trying to put that into practice. So our state, the U.S. government, thought that was significant enough to put this man, Innocent III, on the wall, which I just thought was kind of a fun fact. But Innocent III did regard with misery the body. He wrote this one book about how it like being human is like gross, and having a body is gross, and like the only good thing comes from us, from like what God is willing to give us. So I just think that's a weird mindset. But that is the mindset he had. Yeah, and he wrote a book on that. Pardon me. With church dogmatics burnt, laurel wreaths around his mind. So, like, in Rome, like, the emperor would wear a laurel wreath, which is like a crown of leaves. And I'm kind of like comparing him to like the emperor, in which, but it's not supposed to be a very nice comparison. I'm like kind of implying he's despotic. And he sent people to the flame stake for heresy if they didn't fit his dogmas. You know, they had all these weird dogmas. They had like these dogmatic formulas where it'd be like, well, if you believe this, then you must believe this, and therefore you have to be Catholic. And a lot of other people would be like, we're Christian, but we're just not Catholic. And if he doesn't, if these people do not fit the like formula, the dogmas that the Catholic Church has worked out, then they have to be killed, apparently. And I call him Pontifex because that is a title that the Pope is referred to as. But what it is like they took the Pontifex was like the leader of the Roman Church before they were Christian, so when they were like a pagan empire. But interestingly enough, the Pope kind of took that title and carried it over into the Christian era. So, I don't know, I'm just kind of, again, equating the papacy with this kind of, this empire, this evil empire. And I'm saying, you are that, you're a continuation of that. Saying something like that. But I suppose if there are some people who think Rome is really cool, and so they would be really excited about that comparison. And they're like, yes, we are carrying through this tradition. But I don't know. If you do not think Rome is cool, then you'll interpret it differently. So he either sent these heretics to the stake or denied them sacrament by interdict. An interdict was kind of something, a policy Innocent developed, in which like all the sacrament rituals that churches would do would be deemed invalid. And so in the church, if you're not able to get these sacraments, then you have to go to hell. And so really, if you think about it, it's kind of pretty messed up. The Pope is saying, well, I don't want you guys to get your sacraments, which means you're going to go to hell. I'm not going to burn you at the stake, but I do want to send your soul to eternal torment. So I thought that was a bit rude. The Cathar cried, is this not how Christ had died? The Cathars are one of these such heretical groups. And Innocent III launched a crusade against them, and he killed a ton of them. Some people have called it a genocide. I don't know, perhaps it is, why not? And but they were kind of just, they were practicing, I think, a form of Christianity that was like communal based, and in which people had more equal rights. You weren't beholden to this like imperial structure, and it was just kind of people governing themselves. And so I don't think they were doing anything wrong, but then they were kind of slain. They were martyred like Jesus. or ex cathedra, are you Christ's millenarian? Ex cathedra means from the throne. That's kind of a papal term that they use. From the throne of Peter, the successor of Jesus. Are you Christ's millenarian? So, millenarian means like apocalyptic. And apparently it was said that one day Jesus will come back in apocalyptic mode and like destroy his enemies. So if the Pope is saying, well, I'm Jesus on earth, then I think a lot of the time they seem to be tempted to take on that role of Christ during apocalypse. And they take on that role of being like world sort of emperor, warlord, I don't know. And they think it's okay to maybe destroy a whole population of people, a whole culture. That's really bold of them. But, yeah. And then, like, the Pope's enemies were calling the Pope Antichrist. Because then, this is the difficulty of that prophecy. Because Jesus apparently is going to do that, but also another guy called Antichrist is going to try to do basically the same thing. But he's going to do it for evil. And then Jesus is going to do it for good. So then it depends on what one thinks is good and evil. One might think the Catholic Church dominating the world is good if you're Catholic. But if you're, for example, a Cathar, then you would think it's disastrous and you would think it is the Antichrist trying to take over the world. So that's kind of the dual nature of that. So, crusading heathens, slaying Arians. Innocent launched several crusades against his enemies, who presumably were thought of as heathens. And Arian, this just means there was this guy in maybe like the year 300 whose name was Arius. And he developed an interpretation of the Gospels in which was not Trinitarian is the word. So the official interpretation, the official church interpretation of the Trinity is like Father, Son, Holy Spirit are all basically equal and they're one thing, but they're also three things. And then Arius was like, well, no, you can, I can point to several instances in Scripture where Jesus says, I am below the Father. And Jesus says, only the Father is perfect. I am not. So that was the Arian interpretation, that the will of Christ was subordinate to the one of God. And this became a big problem for followers of Arius who were called Arians. But it's not like they're necessarily followers. I think that's not a bizarre interpretation of the Gospels. Just people who held that opinion were labeled Arians. And the church was like, oh, this is not the official reading of things, therefore you have to die, actually. So, yes, that's what I'm saying. Slaying Arians. Pope slaying Arians. That's what happened. Do you risk that ultimate prize at price of playing Antichrist? And the ultimate prize would be that world domination thing. But if you're a Catholic, you're like, oh, we're dominating the world, and this is good. And we've won the ultimate prize. We fulfilled that prophecy. But the risk you're playing is that of being Antichrist. And in thinking you were dominating the world for good, you actually dominated it for evil. And in which case you would be Antichrist. Oops. So, yeah. That's basically the poem. It's really laden with a lot of references, kind of complicated, but I had a lot of fun writing it. So if you listen to this entire ramble, then congrats. And thank you.